See, in last class, what we have done is we have discussed the basic philosophy of W.V.O. Quine. Uh, in last class itself, I told that in next class we will be taking up it in more detail, and particularly we will take up those topics which have been repeatedly asked in previous years by uh, I mean, in previous years' exams. So basically, if you see, these are the topics which we decided that we will take up in detail in next class. First is Quine's argument in two dogmas of empiricism. It was his essay basically. This is this two dogmas of empiricism. This is an essay written by uh, Hume. So, but this essay contains both. Uh, I mean, there are basically 2 points he has raised. One, he has criticized reductionism, and second, he has also rejected the analytic synthetic distinction. So, these 2 points have already been contained in this essay, Two Dogmas of Empiricism. I mean, basically, these 2 points only he calls two dogmas of empiricism. So, these two, second and third, are the same thing. So basically, if you see point number 1, 2, and 3 contain basically two issues. One is criticism of reductionism, and second is rejection of analytic synthetic distinction. So these 2 points are main points from Quine's philosophy. So now we'll one by one we'll try to understand in detail, because basics in brief we have already seen in last class. So here we will be try to understand this in more detail. So see, this is first the thing we are taking Quine's argument in two dogmas of empiricism. Now, see, as I already told, two dogmas of empiricism is a landmark essay by W.V.O. Quine. It is considered one of the most influential philosophical works of 20th century. In fact, another critic, Peter Godfrey Smith, he says that it is one of the most important papers of 20th century philosophy. Now, in this essay, as I earlier told what he has done basically, what Quine has done. He attacks two fundamental assumptions of classical empiricism. What are those fundamental assumptions? Already we discussed this earlier also. Now, these two fundamental assumptions of empiricism and also logical positivism and psychological empiricism. So basically, see, whatever is assumed by classical empiricism, same is also assumed by logical positivism, same is also assumed by psychological empiricism. What are these two concepts which they assume, that is, empiricism assumes, and the same has been called as two dogmas by Quine. Now, first is analytic synthetic distinction, and second is reductionism. Now, why Quine calls them dogmas? Because they were accepted without proper justification according to him. So he says that since there was no proper justification, there are inherent contradictions involved. Therefore, these are two dogmas. Now, what what will be the result of this? We will anyway see in detail, but see, once you reject these dogmas, that is analytic synthetic distinction and also reductionism, the result will be that the boundary between metaphysics and science will be blurred, and philosophy and empirical inquiry also will be blurred. So both will be basically, there is a, as he says, there is difference of degrees only, and not actual two systems or two different streams are there. Now we'll go one by one and we'll try to understand in detail what are these two things which Quine is talking. So first is analytic synthetic distinction. So Quine criticized analytic synthetic distinction, which was earlier assumed by classical philosophy. So he has given a critique of analytic synthetic distinction. And this is his first main part of his Quine's philosophy, which we should understand and which is important from UPSC point of view. Now, before we go what Quine said, let us try to understand little historical background. What has classical philosophy believed, basically? So many philosophers, including rationalists, empiricists, anyway, they accepted the distinction, but even the rationalists like Leibniz, they also accepted analytic synthetic distinction, because he says there are truths of reason and there are truths of fact. Truths of facts are basically synthetic statements, truths of reason are basically analytic statement. Similarly, other rationalist philosophers also. And accordingly, he has given two associated principles also, law of non-contradiction and principle of sufficient reason. This is from Leibniz. Similarly, Hume also. Hume again distinguished between analytic, synthetic, and he has given one, he says relations of ideas, and another he says matters of fact. Kant also, he first distinguished between analytic judgments and synthetic judgments, but then he also introduced another new class, synthetic a priori judgments, which he says basically maths and science represent. So even though he accepted two different things, analytic judgments, synthetic judgments, he also introduced a new synthetic a priori judgments classification also. Logical positivists, Karna, Payer, Schlick, etc., they also argued similarly that analytic propositions are true by meaning alone, and this is only purely linguistic issue there. Nothing more is involved, because you need not observe or experience anything. Language or sentence or statement itself contains the truth. For example, all bachelors are unmarried. So this is as per them, analytic statement. Now, synthetic propositions are true by facts based on experience. For example, it's raining. So one has to observe whether it is raining or not. So this is what actually in brief is analytic synthetic distinction, which was earlier believed by classical philosophy and number of philosophers. Few examples have been given. Now, after this, after analyzing this, what was the claim of Quine? He rejected analytic synthetic distinction and called it a dogma. His thesis or his proposition was, no statement is purely analytic or purely synthetic. That's what he said. According to him, every statement is connected with experience, directly or indirectly. So one cannot say that analytic statements are not connected with experience. Similarly, he says that one cannot say that synthetic statements do not contain a priori things. So this is what he says. Every statement contains both linguistic and factual elements. So he says that there is no absolute boundary between analytic and synthetic truths. Both are basically, at some point of time, both merge. And then to explain his statement or his proposition further, he has tried to explain why analytic statements are problematic. Analytic statements alone are problematic. That's what he says. That problem of analyticity is basically circularity of argument. So analytic statements contain circular arguments, and therefore, strictly analytic statements. I mean, there are no strictly analytic statements. Now, classical philosophy believed that analytic statements are true by meaning itself. This is what classical philosophy believed. Now, what Quine said, he said that meaning itself is explained by using the terms like synonymy, necessity, or interchangeability. Now, for example, our definition also. So he says, but these concepts again depend on analyticity. So therefore, I mean, the whole explanation becomes circular. So the whole argument is circular. Roughly one example, very basic example, peace is not war and war is not peace. So both depend on each other. So this is basically a circular kind of argument, which explains nothing or which proves nothing basically. So what he says, analyticity cannot be defined clearly without circularity. So here circular argument is there and therefore that argument is invalid. So circular argument, wherever it is there, is invalid. Another concept he has brought to justify his statement is holism and the web of belief. Now, what is this concept? Earlier also we have explained. We'll just revise it once again. Now, Quine, what he said, instead of analytic synthetic distinction, there is a concept of holism. What is the concept of holism, or what is the idea of holism? Individual statements are not tested alone. So one statement, if one statement is given, its meaning doesn't come from it alone. What happens? Entire system of beliefs are tested together. So what he says, our statements about the world face the tribunal of experience not individually but as a whole. So therefore, he has given the concept of holism. And similarly, he has tried to explain, if you see, that observational statements come from experience, which lead to ordinary scientific laws, which lead to philosophy and theoretical science, which further lead to core logic and mathematics. So this is basically concept of holism and web of belief, which basically he wants to say that a single statement contains no meaning. For meaning, whole system of beliefs or whole uh, uh, system of statements need to be experienced and need to be analyzed. So statements near experience change easily. Logic and mathematics change slowly, but even logic and mathematics can change in extreme situations. See, the analytic statements, what they represented as per classical philosophy, that logic and mathematics are constant. They do not change. Even scientific facts do not change. This is what was analytic statements. He says that it's not true. Even logical, see, experience anyway changes, so there is no problem in that. But even logic and mathematics also changes. Yes, it's slowly. I mean, it doesn't change in same way as experience changes. So therefore, difference between analytic and synthetic truths is only of degree, not of kind. This is what his conclusion is. Now, just to explain how logic and mathematics also change, a little further explanation we will try to understand. See, traditional empiricists or even rationalists believed that logic and mathematics are absolutely true. They are immune to experience. They do not change. They are constant. So, but what Quine said, no, it's not true. Even logic and mathematics are revisable in principle. Now, modern science or modern concepts do indicate towards that. For example, quantum physics challenges classical logic. Then another, law of excluded middle is questioned in quantum logic. So basically, quantum physics and quantum logic, vector mathematics, all these say that the logic and mathematics also can be revised in principle. That's what Quine concluded based on this. So he says that analytic and synthetic statements are different only in degrees. It's not that they are totally different. So no statement is immune to revision. This is his conclusion. Again, same thing we'll try to understand a little more detailed. It's degree, not of kind. Analytic and synthetic truths are not fundamentally different. The difference is only quantitative, that is degree, not qualitative of kind. Some statements are more central to logic and mathematics. Some are more peripheral, which fall in empirical statements. But even logical and mathematical statements, which are called central statements, also do change slowly. Now, just to explain this, he has used a number of metaphors. One is building metaphor, then army metaphor. So, for example, building, he says that observational statements are foundation of the building. Logic and mathematics are upper floors. But the whole building is connected. So it's not that the upper floor is totally different from the foundation. So this is what one metaphor, building metaphor. Army metaphor, if most of the army is affected, even the commander will be affected. So if we say that logic and mathematics are commander, so if experience is affected, logic and mathematics also will be affected. So radical changes in experience can affect even logic and mathematics. So with the help of metaphors, also he explains the same thing. So this is basically the difference between the critique of analytic synthetic distinction by Quine. Now we'll come to second part of this whole essay, critique of reductionism. Now before we go to reductionism, definitely we will like to know what is reductionism. This already we have explained in earlier class, but let us try to understand very briefly what is reductionism. Reductionism means every meaningful statement can be reduced to statements about immediate experience. This is reductionism, a theory given by empiricists mainly. So what was the earlier view? Hume said that objects are bundles of sense impressions. This is a reductionist view. Logical positivists also similarly believed that objects are logical constructions from sense data. So this is basically reductionist view. So objects or object statements can be translated into sense data statements. This is reductionist view. So this is reductionism. Now, just to little more clarity we should try to bring. Now, earlier statements or earlier empiricists believe in atomism, theory of atomism. Quine believed in holism, as we have earlier also seen. So earlier empiricists said that meaning lies in words. Logical positivists said that meaning lies in sentences. So they have given verification theory of meaning. Now, Quine has criticized these atomistic view because these both are atomistic views of meaning. Even earlier empiricists or logical positivists. Quine has criticized this view and he said that meaning is not in words or sentences, but in the whole theory or language system itself. As we have seen, his concept is called holism. So therefore, individual sentences are never verified alone. Whole scientific theories are verified, and this is called holism. So he said that reductionism is a false theory and it is a dogma as per him, dogma of empiricism. Now he has tried to further explain holism and analyticity. Analyticity depends on verification theory because if you remember earlier, he said that analytic statements do depend for meaning on, if you see, synonymy, necessity, interchangeability, and definition. So same thing he is trying to explain here again. Just to understand, some points will be repeated. So, holism and analyticity, according to Quine, analyticity depends on verification theory. Analyticity means analytic statements, basically, if you can say, or analytic statements characteristic. Depends on verification theory. Verification theory depends on reductionism, and reductionism itself is false or dogma. Therefore, analyticity cannot be clearly separated from synthetic statements. So, earlier conclusion, what he has concluded, same thing. Any statement can be held true if language is adjusted. No statement is immune to revision. Even mathematics can change, mathematics or logic can change, can modify. So, this is his basically critique of reductionism. So earlier in first part, he has given critique of analytic synthetic distinction. Second part, critique of reductionism. Now, what are the consequences of this uh, two critiques basically of Quine? Now, first is collapse of analytic synthetic distinction that happened. Since all statements are interconnected, it is impossible to draw a strict boundary between analytic and synthetic statements. Second result which happened is philosophy and science are basically both are interrelated. So what he argued, metaphysics is generalized science and philosophy is conceptual analysis of science. So philosophy is continuous with science. That's what his conclusion. So this is second result which happened. And third, ontological commitment. Logical positivists believe logic is metaphysically neutral. Quine rejected. And then he said, to be is to be the value of a bound variable, which means our theories commit us to certain entities. Logic is not neutral. So basically, these three are mainly the results of these two criticisms of Quine. Now, another question comes, usually sometimes short question or something like that may come, whether Quine was an empiricist or radical empiricist, or what kind of empiricist, if at all he was an empiricist. So that we'll just briefly will try to understand. Did Quine reject empiricism? The answer will be no. Quine accepted two basic principles of empiricism. What are the two basic principles which he accepted? Two he has rejected, as we have already seen. Analytic synthetic distinction he has rejected. He has also rejected reductionism. But what he has accepted? All knowledge is ultimately based on experience. That's what he accepted. Meaning and language are ultimately ground in sense experience. This also he accepted. Therefore, Quine remains an empiricist, but a radical one. So he can be called as a radical empiricist. Now, if we try to critically evaluate his theory, because that is also nowadays, as you know, critical evaluation, comparative evaluation of various propositions are being asked in exams. So critical evaluation, let us try to understand, critically evaluate to what extent his theory was accepted or criticized. Now, one of the important critics, Grice and Strawson. Strawson's philosophy also we need to study. That also perhaps we'll try to take up in next class, because after Quine, Strawson is important. I mean, he's perhaps one of the last philosophers in Western philosophy syllabus. So Grice and Strawson, they said that in defense of a dogma, they argued that Quine sets an unrealistically high standard of analyticity. Analytic synthetic distinction is necessary for language and thought. This is the view of Strawson and Grice. He said, I mean, they basically tried to explain with examples that a 3-year-old child understands Russell theory of types and a 3-year-old child is an adult. Now, both are false, but A is factually false and B is logically impossible. So, what is factually false is basically synthetic. And what is logically impossible is analytic. So, they said that analytic synthetic distinction is necessary for language and thought. And Quine has unnecessarily set a very unrealistic high standard for analyticity. This was the comment from Grice and Strawson. So distinction between fact and concept is real according to them. Another critique Hilary Putnam, he argued, basically Quine attacks two different notions, analyticity and a priority. He said that Quine's rejection of a priority is historically significant, but analyticity and a priority should not be confused. So basically, he said that Quine has rejected actually a priority and not analyticity. And that, both cannot be mixed with each other. There are a priori statements, there are analytic statements. So this is what Putnam said. Then another critique, Gerald Karch, he tried to define analyticity in a non-circular way using syntax. And that by that he tried to avoid the criticism or critique of Quine. Another critique, Scott Soames, argued that Quine's argument depends on two assumptions. All necessary truths are analytic. Analyticity is required to explain necessity. If these assumptions are rejected, so basically what he says, that the basis of Quine's assumptions itself are wrong. And if they are rejected, then the Quine's argument itself will become very weak. So if these two assumptions are rejected, then Quine arguments becomes very weak. Another important philosopher, Rudolf Carnap, he replied, every statement has two aspects. One is verbal, that is linguistic. Another is factual, that is empirical. Statements with high verbal content are analytic. Statements with high factual content are synthetic. So analytic synthetic distinction is relative, not meaningless. So he basically in a way tried to support Quine's theory. Now, many times, as I told, comparative philosophy is also quite important. So comparison with Western and Indian philosophy or Indian and Western philosophy is also asked and need to be mentioned also. So, very brief comparison we can, because not very direct and very elaborate comparison is there. But if we try to find some parallel with Indian philosophy, so Quine's holism is comparable to Mimamsa's critique of Partha Pramanyavad. So this we can just mention very briefly if comparative statements we want to mention, because both these theory, both basically reject reduction of knowledge to atomic facts and external verification of every statement. So both emphasize what? Holistic nature of knowledge. So what can be final conclusion? Quine did not destroy empiricism, he transformed it. By rejecting analytic synthetic distinction and reductionism, he undermined logical positivism, of course, blurred the boundary between philosophy and science, introduced the concept of holism, created his own radical empiricism. So thus, Quine is not an enemy of empiricism, but its most radical reformer. This can be concluded. Now we'll go to, so basically, see, in two dogmas of empiricism, the essay from Quine, these basic things have been explained, and also we have critically evaluated the whole thing. Same thing are asked separately also. And that's what in next topic. So next topics we will not try to cover in detail. We'll very briefly we'll try it, because we have already covered in detail. So most things will be repetitions. But what are the next? Reductionism. Reductionism already we have discussed. But let us try to once again revise it, because this separately also it is asked. So as we know, we have already done. Reductionism is the belief that each meaningful statement is equivalent to some logical construct referring to immediate experience. So immediate experience can be linked with each meaningful statement. Now, this is what Hume has criticized. And along with reductionism, he has also criticized analytic synthetic distinction. He says that these are two dogmas because they are not based on correct logic. They are not, basically they are ill-founded. Now, he also links reductionism and analyticity. We have already seen earlier that analyticity can be saved only if we accept the verification theory of meaning of logical positivists. And verification theory of meaning, a statement is meaningful, it can be verified by experience. An analytic statement is one that is true no matter what, does not require empirical verification. This is analytic statement. I mean, we know analytic and synthetic. Synthetic is dependent on experience. Analytic is dependent on a priori things, on the statement itself, because all bachelors are unmarried. So this is analytic statement. So what Quine said, how are statements verified? Now, an empiricist will say by reducing statements to sense experience. This is what empiricist verification is. Thus, to save analyticity, one must assume reductionism. So Quine argues that reductionism itself is a problematic and unproven. Therefore, if reductionism fails, analyticity also fails. Therefore, analytic synthetic distinction collapses. So basically, he says that analytic synthetic distinction is based on reductionism, and since reductionism fails, this distinction also collapses. Now, what is Quine's critique of reductionism? We have already seen. Let us see once again. The impossible task of translation. Quine argues that reductionism requires what? It requires translation of all meaningful statements into sense datum language, sense data, which means that we must define a pure sense datum language. We must translate every scientific and ordinary statement into it. Quine says this is practically impossible, and therefore reductionism fails. Now, what Carnap says, Quine discusses Rudolf Carnap's attempt in another essay, The Logical Structure of the Word. This is Rudolf Carnap's essay. Carnap tried to construct all knowledge from sense data. Now, Quine criticizes Carnap on 3 grounds. Basically, whatever the criticism of Quine on Carnap's, this is the criticism of basically reductionism also. So Carnap's sense datum language was not true, because see, earlier Quine has said that for a meaningful reductionism, there has to be a pure sense datum language should be constructed, where every experience should be linked with some sense data. Now this Carnap has already attempted. So therefore Carnap's attempt has come here, and it has failed also. So that's what he wants to say. So Carnap's attempt has been criticized on 3 grounds by Quine. First, Carnap's sense datum language was not pure. It already included logic, set theory, and mathematics, which are usually not based on sense experience. So Quine remarks that a strict empiricist would reject such luxury. So therefore, Carnap's language is not pure and not acceptable by empiricists. Carnap also showed great ingenuity in defining sensory concepts, but even admitted that his project was incomplete. So Carnap failed to define crucial relations. So basically, see, the point here is that Carnap has tried to build a language that every experience can be linked to sense data, in which he has miserably failed. So that's what Quine said, that since Carnap has already failed, it's already very elaborately he has done, but still failed. So therefore, it's not possible. So therefore, reductionism fails. Therefore, Carnap's project could not be completed even in principle. Reductionism as metaphysical faith. So as a language anyway fails, so reductionism is not proven. It is a metaphysical article of faith. Thus, reductionism is a problematic as analyticity. As problematic as analyticity. Because it's not proven, so only it can be accepted as a metaphysical faith, which is equivalent to analyticity. Just you are assuming without any proof, without any consistent logic. Classical empiricism and reductionism, how they are related, let us try to understand. See, Hume, as earlier also we have seen, Hume said that objects are bundle of sense impressions. Logical positivists have said that objects are logical constructions from sense data. Quine rejects this view. Earlier we have seen already. And he has given as an alternative. See, this view is atomistic view. Atomistic view. So Quine rejects this, and he has given the concept of holism. Instead of reductionism, he proposed holism. What is the idea of holism? Not a single statement, but whole system of science that is tested by experience. So whole web of belief or whole system is tested. So this is what statements are interconnected. Logical laws are also part of system. No statement is tested in isolation. A group of statement or a web of statements or whole uh, interrelated statements are tested. Therefore, talking about empirical content out of single statement is misleading. Now, definitely, Quine's views resulted in collapse of analytic synthetic distinction because of holism. He said that, earlier argument was that analytic statements are true by meaning. This is classical philosophy. Synthetic statements are true by experience. But Quine said that any statement is neither purely analytic nor purely synthetic. So he also said that no statement is immune to revision. Even logic, mathematics, or definitions can be revised, as quantum mathematics and quantum physics have shown. So therefore, the revisability of logic by quantum logic, I've already told, we have already discussed that, so I'm not going in detail. But he has seen the developments in science. Therefore, he has taken up that view from there. So logic and science can change under empirical pressure. That's what his conclusion was after seeing Einsteinian physics and also quantum logic. So consequences of Quine's critique of reductionism, we have already seen part of that in earlier topic. One is blurring of metaphysics and science. According to Quine, there is no sharp boundary between these two. Physical objects are theoretical posits like the gods of Homer. So basically what he says, that science and metaphysics are interlinked. So it's not that both are two entirely different things. So physical objects are accepted because they explain experience better. Difference between science and myth is pragmatic, not absolute. And his critique of reductionism also gives a shift towards pragmatism. He argues that science aims to predict future experience using past experiences. The best theory is one that works most efficiently. So therefore, truth is judged by practical success. So it also, in a way, leads to pragmatism. So atomism versus holism, in the earlier empiricists, I have already told, they believed in atomism. For them, for example, Hume, the unit of meaning was word. Logical positivist, it's sentence. But for Quine, it was a web of sentences, you can say, or whole language theory itself. So the unit of meaning is whole language theory itself. Therefore, words are not verified alone. Sentences are not verified alone. Whole theories are verified together. So this is Quine's holism. This question can be asked separately also. So that also for that we should be ready. Now, what is final implications of this theory? Knowledge as web. So Quine concludes that all knowledge is man-made fabric. Experience touches this fabric only at the edges. If experience changes radically, even logic and mathematics can change. So therefore, analytic truths are relatively secure, but not absolutely secure. So basically, he says that analytic and synthetic are different in degrees only. So not totally different. So from Quine's critique of reductionism, two major results follow. One, unity of philosophy and science, and second, radical pragmatism. What does this mean? Metaphysics is generalized science, and philosophy is continuation of science. So these are the results of his reductionism, a critique of reductionism basically. Radical pragmatism, the value of a theory depends on how well it works. No statement is beyond revision. Every statement can be revised in time. Even science, maths, logic can be revised depending on experience. So if you want to know one line summary of the whole thing, Quine rejects reductionism because meaning and verification belong not to individual statements, but to whole system of language and science. Therefore, no statement is absolutely analytic or immune to revision. Because as per classical philosophy, analytic statements are ever true, always true. That is not possible. Now we'll go to third part, which already we have seen, but again we once again will try to revise it. So Quine's rejection of analytic and synthetic distinction and his subsequent philosophical arguments. So sometimes questions are asked like that because all these three topics I have taken from the PYQs only and repeated PYQs. So starting point we have already know the two dogmas of empiricism is a very important essay. He has given two views. So I'm not going to touch. So two theories he has taken, or two. One is criticism of analytic synthetic distinction. Another is criticism of reductionism. So background also we have seen analytic synthetic distinction. Classical philosophy believed that both are different. Even Leibniz distinguished truths of reason and truths of fact. Even Hume, relation of ideas and matters of fact. As far as Kant, he also distinguished between analytic judgments and synthetic judgments. However, he introduced synthetic a priori judgments. Logical positivists also analytic propositions and synthetic propositions, they differentiated between the two. Synthetic propositions are purely empirical. Analytic propositions are purely linguistic, which are true by meaning alone. All bachelors are married and it's raining. Earlier also we have seen these examples. These are very standard examples. So basically what they believed, analytic statements are language-based, synthetic statements are fact-based. Now, as we have seen, Quine has rejected this dichotomy. Quine's claim was that this is a dogma. He has given the core thesis that there is no absolute difference between analytic and synthetic statement. Every sentence is connected with experience, so it's a matter of degree only. Every sentence contains both linguistic and factual statements, elements. Therefore, no statement is purely analytic or purely synthetic. So, two types of analytic statements he has tried to analyze. So, one is logical truths. For example, no unmarried man is married. This is true due to logical structure regardless of meaning of words. So, this is one kind of state analytic statements are given as an example. Then another statement, another kind of statements are based on synonymy. So first is based on logical truths. Second is based on synonymy, that no bachelor is married. This depends on the synonym, that bachelor is synonym of unmarried man. But what Quine argues is the second type is a problematic type because it depends on the notion of synonymy. And earlier also we have seen that notion of synonymy or definition or meaning, all these things are again give the circular argument. So problem of synonymy leads to circularity of argument. Now, Quine tries to explain what is synonymy. It is basically answers by definition or by dictionary or by interchangeability. Two words are interchangeable, or two words, one is defined, one statement is defined by one word, or it gives a dictionary meaning. So, but what he says that all these explanations are circular in nature. For example, definition. We say that bachelor is unmarried man, but Quine asks, how do we know this definition? A dictionary cannot help because a dictionary only records already known synonyms. It presupposes synonymy. So therefore, definition depends on synonymy. Then another is interchangeability problem. Some words, let us say, two words are synonymous if they can be exchanged without changing truth value. For example, bachelor has fewer than 10 letters. This is a statement, let us say. Here, bachelor cannot be replaced by unmarried man because it has more than 10 letters. So here, even though the meaning is same, interchangeability fails. So that's what he tried to prove. Then another, cognitive synonymy and necessity. So what he says that, for example, necessarily all bachelors are unmarried men. But then for this statement, Quine argues to explain necessity, we need analyticity. To explain analyticity, we need synonymy. And therefore, we move in circle. And circular arguments are invalid, basically. Circular arguments to prove anything are invalid. So this is what he wants to say. Quine's main conclusion on circularity: any attempt to define analyticity is circular because either it involves synonymy, or it involves interchangeability, or necessity, or meaning. And all these presuppose analyticity. So therefore, we are having circular argument. For example, simple argument, if you take war is not peace and peace is not war. So this basically defines nothing. So therefore, analyticity cannot be clearly explained. And then accordingly, Quine has given the theory of holism and web of knowledge. So he says that no purely linguistic or purely empirical sentence is there. Purely linguistic means analytic. Purely empirical, synthetic. So he says that no statement is either purely analytic or purely synthetic. According to Quine, there are no sentences that are purely linguistic. There are no sentences that are purely empirical. All sentences are interconnected. And he says all our knowledge, including science and philosophy, is man-made fabric which touches experience only at edges. Therefore, some sentences are directly connected to experience and others are indirectly connected, but all are part of one system. So Quine proposes theory of holism instead of analytic synthetic distinction, or instead of atomism. So holism says that experience tests not individual statements but whole system of beliefs. This is theory of holism. So single sentences are not verified alone. Entire theories are tested together. And he also says that analytic and synthetic distinction is not of kind, it's only of degree. So difference between analytic and synthetic truth is not absolute. It is only a matter of degree, not of kind. Some statements are more central, which form in logic and mathematics. Some are more peripheral, which are observational statements based on experience. But even central statements can change. Therefore, the analytic statements also have synthetic part in that, or synthetic mixture of that, you can say. Now, he also concludes that logic and mathematics can be revised, and he has given the example of quantum physics, law of excluded middle. So that also you can quote in modern science. That's what they say, that logic and mathematics can be revised. No statement is immune to revision. Then he has also given metaphors to explain how both are linked with each other. Building metaphor, we have already explained. I'm not going into that. Army metaphor. So with these, he tries to explain. Now, what is consequences of Quine's rejection of analytic synthetic distinction? Collapse of analytic synthetic distinction. Since all sentences are interconnected, it is impossible to draw a clear boundary between analytic synthetic statements. Knowledge as a web, because he has given theory of holism. So he argues that knowledge is a web or network. Experience affects the web at its edges. Radical experience can change the entire web. And therefore, analytic truths are relatively secure, not absolutely secure. So in degree wise, yes, they are little more secure than synthetic statements, but it's not absolutely secure because even logic and mathematics do change. Science and mathematics also change. Now, what is the final philosophical result? So Quine's rejection leads to three major conclusions. So this is very important. This we should try to understand. One is holism. Meaning belongs to whole system, not of individual sentences or words. Revisability. No statement is beyond revision. Even logic, mathematics can be revised. Unity of knowledge. Philosophy, science, logic, mathematics form one continuous system. So there is not absolute distinction is not there. So these are three main conclusions from Quine's theory. And if you want to say in one line, Quine rejects the analytic synthetic distinction because meaning and truth belong not to isolated statements, but to the entire system of knowledge. Therefore, no statement is purely analytic or immune to revision. Now, this completes basically what I wanted to say regarding Quine. In next class, we will try to take up Strawson because he is also one of the last philosophers, usually from Quine and Strawson, questions pertaining to maybe in some years 20 marks questions are asked. Uh, and I mean, basically, very limited theories they have given. I mean, it's not that very lengthy. So, if one can understand Quine and Strawson, perhaps 20 marks is easy to attempt because anyway, you will study hard rationalism, empiricism, then uh, Kant, Hegel, and all those philosophers. But this basically existentialism, logical positivism, all those things, anyway, you will study. But this usually students leave because they feel that they are unknown philosophers there. But it's quite easy if we just understand that. So I just want to cover these important this thing, because then your question will become good, because definitely one question will be there where one part you will be knowing, another part will be Strawson or Quine which you may not be knowing, and that will create problems. So if we cover this in very simple words or simple manner, perhaps you will try to understand and try to attempt it. So thanks a lot for joining me today. In next class, we will try to cover a next philosopher, and we'll again take up in next class.